Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Footprints of the Creator. Your host this evening is myself, Yusuf Amod, and Abdul Kader Amod.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome. This evening's program we are going to conclude with the series on the vegetable kingdom, and we are now going to proceed on to the animal kingdom with special reference to various phenomena in the animal kingdom which Allah has pointed out and which we see on a daily basis and which all point to the divine handiwork of Allah. Now, what we're going to analyze is exactly how do plants reproduce and multiply. Basically, there are two methods. One is known as the sexual and the asexual method. But before we go on to that, we need to turn our attention to what the Quran has to say with regard to this aspect. We need to turn to Surah 36, verse 33 to 36. And it goes as follows. A sign for them is the earth that is dead. We do give it life, and produce grain therefrom, of which ye do eat. And we produce therein orchards with date palms and vines, and we cause springs to gush forth therein, that they may enjoy the fruits of this artistry. It was not their hands that made this. Will they not then give thanks? Glory to Allah, who created in pairs all things that the earth produces, as well as their own humankind, and other things of which they have no knowledge. These four verses raise some interesting points. The first aspect which I'd like to highlight, we have dealt with this before, so just to reiterate, where Allah brings to our attention the sign of a dead earth being given life and producing vegetation and food for us to eat. This is always throughout the Quran. In many places the similitude is given for man to reflect and ponder. Just as the earth is dead, so when we will be dead, and as the earth resurrects with rain, so too will be the resurrection. So yeah, Allah always drives home the point that ponder, reflect on the dead earth and how it grows back to life, and think as well, when you die, you so too will be resurrected. That is the first point we've mentioned before, which Allah highlights in these verses. The second point as well, where Allah says, the fruits of this artistry that man enjoys. But Allah adds that it was not their hands that made this. So now one may ponder that man sows the seed in the ground, he plants the seed, he tills the soil, he waters the earth and puts the fertilizer and takes care, and out comes fruit and plants, and he enjoys the produce of his hard work. Yet Allah says it is not his hands. What is it that Allah is referring to here? If we look a little deeper, we realize that it is indeed, man has got nothing really that he can take credit for. Because the fruit and the plants grow, it is not due to man's efforts. Man's effort is but a tiny part of the entire process. This phenomena of growth occurs primarily because of Allah's laws, His divine laws and immutable laws that He has placed on this earth and which function for our benefit. As we've mentioned in previous episodes, I think it was 2 episodes ago, we mentioned about man being able to float on the seas with a ship. That is only possible because Allah has made this law which we discussed of Archimedes' principle. They are His laws that govern on this earth, and man utilizes His laws for his benefit, for man's benefit. So man cannot really take credit for anything, because Allah has placed on this earth His immutable and divine laws which function, whether it is the law of gravity, whether it is the law of action-reaction, whether it is the law of the genetic constitution in the seed which makes it grow up. All these are divine laws which Allah has placed on this earth. Man merely taps onto these laws and uses it for his benefit. So this is what Allah says, that it is not their hands. Man cannot take credit for any of the for the produce that grows on the earth, because Allah has placed the laws governing the seed, governing soil, governing life, and man merely benefits from it. The last point which I'd like to highlight, which is a very interesting point, this deals with the aspect of botany, which was only discovered in the early 19th century. And this is where Allah says, glory to Allah who created in pairs all things that the earth produces. Now here we are told in these verses, as well as many other places in the Quran, of the existence of opposite sexes, that is both male and female parts in plants. Just to quote some of the other references, in Surah 20 verse 53 Allah says, Allah is the one who sent down water from the sky, and thereby we brought forth pairs of plants, each separate from the other. Again in Surah 22 verse 5 we are told, Thou seest the ground lifeless. When we send down water therein, it shakes and grows, and puts forth every magnificent pair of plants. In Surah 31 verse 10 we are told, We cause to grow on earth every noble pair of plants. In Surah 26 verse 7 to 8 we are told the same. And again in Surah 13 verse 3 we are told, Of all fruits Allah placed on the earth, 2 of a pair. So it is important to bear in mind these verses were revealed 1400 years ago, and in clear, unambiguous statements Allah mentions the existence of male and female parts in the plants. This phenomena, as I've mentioned, was only discovered in the 19th century, that plants have got both male and female aspects. Now the fruit, we know, is actually the end product of reproduction of plants that are superior to other plants. These plants have actually very highly developed and complex organizational structures which make reproduction and the production of fruit possible. Now let us look a little deeper at this whole phenomena of reproduction in the vegetable kingdom. How do plants produce fruit? And how do they reproduce? Basically, there are 2 aspects. One which is called asexual, and the other is sexual reproduction. Now what is the first aspect, asexual reproduction? This, very simply put, is a process of simply multiplying. What happens is you get fragmentation of the organism, it separates from the main plant, and it develops in such a way that it resembles the plant from which it grows. So it can be considered to be a special aspect of growth of the plant, because that cutting will then develop roots, and so you get another plant forming. That is known as asexual reproduction. Now some plants actually have organs which are specially designed for this, and you get some plants which give off spores which behave like seeds, example ferns. So this is the process of sexual reproduction. It is, as I've mentioned, a cutting of the plant or part of the plant which actually grows and resembles the parent plant.
Right, that is now the asexual reproduction. Let us go on to discuss the sexual reproduction in the vegetable kingdom. Now, sexual reproduction in the vegetable kingdom is carried out by the union of male and female parts of the organs found either on the same plant or on separate plants. And it is because of sexual reproduction that results in the variations within the species, as we discussed before. Now, the flower-bearing plants constitute 90% of all plant types, and there are about 260,000 different plant types. Now, the Quran makes special reference to this sexual reproduction in plants in the verses quoted earlier. So let us see how briefly this cycle occurs, which results in the formation of fruit. Now, the flower contains the reproductive parts of the plant. Pollen, which contains the male part, the male gamete, is produced by the anthers and stamens, which are the male part of the plant. Now, this pollen, which is produced by the male part of the plant, must be transferred to the female organ. The female organ, which is the pistil. Now, this has the female gamete inside its ovary. Now, the process of this transferring pollen from the male to the female structure is called pollination. Now, pollination is assisted by numerous different factors. We have birds, we have insects, animals, water, and wind. Now, insects and birds are attracted by the colorful flowers and the sweet nectar. And when they come to the flowers to get the sweet nectar, they carry the pollen which sticks to them to the other flowers. And in this way, they cause the transfer of the pollen from one plant to another, and thereby they assist in the process of pollination. Now, wind is a very important cause of pollination and may even carry pollen for up to 160 kilometers. Now the role played by winds is mentioned in Surah 15 verse 22, where we are told, and we send the fecundating winds or winds that impregnate. Now wind pollination is a very important means of pollination for dates. Now when the pollen reaches the ovary, the male and the female gametes unite to form what is called a zygote. And this zygote develops into an embryo, which basically becomes covered to form a seed. Now the ovary matures, the seeds are released when the fruit matures, and the fruit falls down and breaks down and releasing the seeds. The seeds then are released and lie dormant in the soil, waiting until the next spring. Now the seed is a protection of the young embryo that is inside throughout the cold winter months and throughout all unfavorable conditions. And in fact, it waits until conditions become favorable or until spring arrives. Now the seed itself is indeed a marvel and a miracle of nature. It has been described as a baby plant in a box with its lunch. Now all seeds have three structures: a covering, which is called the seed coat or the tester, the young sporophyte or the embryo, which is going to develop into the plant, and a food supply. Now the seed coat is there for the protection. The young embryo is the one that will grow when it germinates, and the food stores provides energy for the start and the continuation of growth of the young embryo when it starts until it can manufacture its own food. Now seeds vary in size. They may be very small, for example like the tobacco seeds, which in a pod of about 2 centimeters contains 2,500 seeds. Or they can be very large, like the coconut tree, in which case the seed is more than 9 kilograms alone. Now the seeds can remain dormant for a very long period. Most seeds can remain viable for up to 10 years, some even 90 years. Some seeds have been recovered from archaeological diggings and are found to be still viable after periods of more than 1,000 years. This is indeed remarkable, and it shows the remarkable property of the seed to be able to withstand such unfavorable conditions and protect the young embryo that is within. Now, what happens to the seed? The culmination of the reproductive process comes with the germination of the seed. Now, once we find that this is now the final step where the seed actually begins to germinate. Now, in order for the seed to germinate, the conditions must be favorable for it to germinate. There must be fertile soil, there must be sufficient oxygen, must be of the correct temperature, and there must be sufficient water and nutrients. Now, the water causes the seed coat to become soft, and as it softens, we find the seed splits. And when the seed splits, it allows for the roots to emerge, and they begin to grow downwards and begin drawing nutrients from the soil, and the plant itself begins to develop and start growing upwards, and the small seed becomes a seedling, and the seedling grows into the full-grown plant. Now the Quran refers to this process of germination. Now just note the use of the sober and accurate language which the Quran uses to describe this process. In Surah 6 verse 95 we are told, "Truly, Allah splits the seed and the date stone. He brings the living from the dead, and He brings the dead from the living. That is Allah. How then are you deceived?" So we are shown here how beautifully the seed, which is actually dead and lies completely lifeless in the soil, suddenly is brought to life with the beginning of spring, the favorable conditions, and the onset of rain, and how beautifully Allah brings the dead back to life. And this is a reminder to us how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring us back from the dead on the day of judgment. And so we are reminded that everything functions under the divine law, and it is only through this law that the seed germinates. And we are reminded about this in Surah 5 verse 63 and 64. "Have you considered the seed that you sow in the ground? Do you cause it to grow, or are we the cause?" So this brings us very clearly to our notice that everything is so dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is so dependent on the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is so dependent and subservient to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the germination of this seed now to produce a new plant completes the cycle of the plant. There is the plant which produces the flowers where we get pollination and fertilization. We get the production of the embryo which is in the seed itself, and the seed itself germinates, and this germinating seed develops into a new plant. And so how beautiful this cycle continues. Now we find that there are some plants that produce seeds that are not covered by fruit, but this follows exactly the same pattern, whether it is covered by fruit or not. And for example, the pine tree, where the cones are bare and open, and they have seeds which are then dispersed mainly by wind, and they cause pollination and fertilization, but they do not have a fruit. But nonetheless, it follows exactly the same cycle, and it shows how beautiful the cycle continues and how this process is assisted. And to note how beautifully the Quran refers to this phenomena 1400 years ago, at a time when hardly any concept of law even existed.
We are now discussing, as I've mentioned earlier on, this phenomena of pairs. For this we need to turn to Surah 36, verse 36, where Allah says, "Glory be to Him who created pairs of every kind of what the earth produces, of your own kind, that is humans, and of that which they do not know." That's a very important point which Allah mentions. He has created pairs even in aspects which man did not have knowledge of at that time. And possibly even now we may not have knowledge. Again in Surah 51 verse 49 we are told, "And of everything we have created pairs that you may receive admonition." Now here Allah mentions that He has created things in pairs. That's the first point. He has created things even in pairs which were not known at the time of revelation of the Quran. If we look around us, we find abundant illustration of this principle of pairs which Allah refers to. Take a simple thing like a magnet. We know a magnet has two poles, the north and south pole. That is a pair. If you take even the atom, in the atom we have the electron and its pair, the positive proton or the nucleus of the atom, and the electron is negatively charged. So there is the existence of the positive and negative charges in the atom.
An interesting thing they say, in the atom you got the proton, which is a positive, and you got the electron, which is a negative. Then you got the neutron, they say, which is just the marriage officer.
So we can see this important phenomena of pairs, like as Allah mentioned in the Quran, and of that which they do not know. That today we have discovered that there are even pairs even in the minutest particle, which is the atom. Even we look further, the concept of pairs. They have recently discovered, as we've discussed in our early programs, the concept of antimatter, which is floating around in the universe. This is the opposite of matter. This is a phenomena which has only recently been discovered, but even matter has got its opposite pair.
Yeah, just to add to that, you find that even like every particle, as you mentioned, like the electron has got an antimatter pair, which is called the positron. The neutron itself has also got an antimatter, antineutron. So every single particle they discover an antiparticle to it. So everything has a pair in itself as well.
So we can see the beauty of that verse. Allah says He has created things in pairs of which man even does not know. So we are constantly discovering this phenomena of pairs in nature. Anything we look at it, forces, we get equal and opposite forces. Even the phenomena of light and darkness, good and evil, on different levels there is always this contrast, there is always this pairing of things which Allah has created. So we need to look and reflect that when Allah says that He has created not only pairs in plants and animals, but throughout nature, and it is a fact which only today we can appreciate and discover and understand. Now this existence of pairs and this reference which Allah has mentioned of the existence of pairs in aspects of man that man do not know and which only today we have discovered, merely confirms that the Quran is from Allah and it could not have been written by any human being, because such knowledge has only come to man's attention in the past few decades. We can see from the reference to the vegetable kingdom that we have discussed already, the accuracy, that absolute lack of confusion with any mythical and false notions which were present at the time of revelation. The facts are completely in correlation with modern scientific data. There is no mythical and false notions and false interpretations and false ideas as to how the seed grows, as to how plants reproduce. The verses, as I've mentioned, are very clear and specific and consistent with modern scientific data. This, as we mentioned, merely serves to strengthen our belief that the Quran is indeed miraculous. For Allah tells us in Surah 39, verse 43, "We shall show them our signs in the furthest horizons and within themselves, until it becomes manifest to them that this Quran is indeed the truth." So Allah is asking us to reflect. Look at the cosmos, look at the heavens, look at our signs found in nature, and look even within yourselves, and see His divine and immutable laws which operate. And this should make us realize that the Quran is indeed divine, and the author is but Allah. So we now come to the conclusion of the vegetable kingdom. We've discussed many aspects of the vegetable kingdom, and we realize that indeed the vegetable kingdom is very important for man. We have discussed the importance of the vegetable kingdom in providing food for man. This food is a source of trade, commerce, importing, exporting. It has in itself, the vegetable kingdom has opened up a whole world of commerce, trade for man, and, as I've mentioned, provided food for his benefit. Also from the vegetable kingdom, we get various industries which have flourished, whether it is a cotton industry, the timber industry. We get wood being formed for transportation, furniture, building. The benefits of the vegetable kingdom to man are innumerous to mention. Even fuel which we get from the vegetable kingdom. So we can see that plants are definitely a blessing which Allah has brought on for man's benefit. He derives his benefit, his trade, his livelihood, and is totally dependent on the vegetable kingdom for his sustenance and for his day-to-day well-being. Also, the various references in the Quran, Allah draws our attention to how beautifully and masterly the world has been made subservient to man, and how He has made everything for man's benefit. Therefore, the natural consequence of this observation that Allah has created everything for man's benefit is for us to acknowledge Him as our creator and sustainer, and to thank Him and worship Him and Him alone. For we are told in Surah 80, verse 24 to 32, "Let man consider his food. We poured rain abundantly. Then we split the earth in fissures, and we made to grow in it grains and vines and reeds and olives and date palms and gardens densely filled with trees and fruits and pasture, as an enjoyment for you and for your cattle." We are again reminded in Surah 35 verse 3, where we are told, "O mankind, remember the blessings of Allah upon you. Is there a creator other than Allah, who gives you sustenance from the heavens and the earth? There is no God but He. So how then are you deluded?" So with those words, we need to ponder and reflect on the blessings which Allah has made and brought for us. The vegetable kingdom is but one kingdom we have discussed and shown how important it is for man's sustenance and the various miracles found therein. We will now proceed on to the animal kingdom.